80% of the time, it works every time. Hi there, Coach Sage Candy of SageRunning.com here with another training talk. Today we're going to talk about 80-20 training, or the concept that you're balancing higher intensity running with lower intensity running, or aerobic base training, and what that percentage is, right? It's kind of a give and take. And the whole idea, it's not really a new idea. People have written books on it more recently, and people talk about it, they have to throw it around, and that's why I'm doing this training talk. But, the idea came more from the Pareto Principle, I believe. Grazie. It's my Italian, pretty horrible accent. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. But Pareto Principle in economics. Economics, land usage, is the idea that 20% of a population, or 20% of something, influences actually 80% of a greater thing. And it's probably not a good comparison to the running intensities, but the 80-20 numbers do come from Pareto Principle. And the idea, I think it was that 20% of the most wealthy people, or 20% of the population, owned 80% of the land in a certain area, or 20% of a species of plant pollinates 80% of the whole crop or the whole field, right? Things like that. And you can see it in economics, you see it in nature, maybe even the influence that has. But the idea kind of comes back to Arthur Lydiard base building training, and even people before that. This was like in the 1960s, the idea that you need to build this big, large aerobic base, and aerobic meaning mainly easy conversational pace type of running. We'll get into the details here in a bit, but the idea that you're building this house, this big aerobic base, and that's the vast majority of your miles pretty much at all times. You could say that you start off with a higher percentage of easy pace aerobic base running. I'd actually say, like in college, you're training for 5K, 10K mainly. In the summer, the first 3 to 6 weeks in the summer, we're building base for cross-country season. Our coach, my coach Rojo, co-founder of Let'sRun.com, we'd have a schedule, and it was all easy pace mileage. 100% easy conversational pace, because you're building your mileage up, and that was a stress in itself, right? Going from 30 miles a week to 40 miles a week, or 50K a week to 75K a week, right? That was a stress, especially in the first couple weeks. And maybe we'd start throwing in things like strides, or 6 times 20 seconds fast. So okay, that counts, but it's like less than 1% of your high intensity. So the balance there is 100% easy base aerobic miles. And again, this gets into other things like the MOF method and things that have been repackaged over the last couple of decades. The idea that you're building this large aerobic base with mainly a vast majority of the miles are easy aerobic running. So it's not 80-20 at the start of the base period. It's 100%, or maybe 95%, and then 5% is doing some hill sprints and some speed work. Now, the real question comes into play is where do we make that cutoff with what is considered high intensity over the threshold? What is hard running when you have the spectrum? And we'll bring up the Sage running pace intensity spectrum chart here. This is a free download at our website that Coach Sandy Nypaver and I co-created, Sage Running Intensity Spectrum. We see on the spectrum, we go from easy in the green, we're increasing the intensity towards aerobic threshold, lactate threshold. We start getting into like marathon race pace intensity, or even half marathon race pace intensity, and that's where we start to say, okay, you're running half marathon race pace intensity, maybe even close to 10K race pace intensity. That is where some of your thresholds are starting, right? And so anything faster than that, or at a higher heart rate spike than that, is considered high quality running because it's above the threshold, right? And it depends if we go with the aerobic threshold or lactate threshold or something in between, up tempo. We call it Sage running a lot. And it also depends on the nature of the workout, whether you're doing high intensity hill sprints or you're doing kilometer repeats on the track. Generally, things that are starting to cause the lactate levels in your blood to spike exponentially is the official cutoff if you want to get into the science and data. And it's interesting on that. So that's kind of the cutoff with the high intensity stuff, and where we'd start counting workout, either distance covered in a workout, like 8 times a kilometer, you're doing 8 kilometers of quality work, right? That's quite a bit, especially at VO2 max. Or if you were, going to count by minutes, right? Maybe those kilometer repeats took you 3.5 minutes or 4 minutes each, right? So then you do 8, it's 32 minutes worth of quality work, and then, you had a 10-hour training week, right? So you're looking at the percentages there. You could do it by time, or you could do it by the distance covered. And for trail ultra runners, that kind of makes a difference, because I could be doing hill repeats really hard, really high heart rate spike, but I didn't actually cover that much distance because I was running like 10-minute mile pace straight up a mountain or something like that. So it's high intensity training, didn't cover a lot of ground. We go by time. Now, the whole idea, I think, also derived, I mentioned Arthur Lydiard, great, for building in that periodized training, changing your training over time and adding in intensity, and the idea of doing a lot of aerobic, easy pace, conversational pace running under 65, under 75% of your maximum heart rate. Again, a lot of people don't know 100% max heart rate unless you've had a VO2 max test with a heart rate monitor on. It's hard to determine that, but if you're keeping it conversational and you could talk easily while you're running, it's usually considered easy pace, and it's going to probably usually be under 75% of your max. But you look at this book, again, I mentioned this in my other talk, Better Training for Distance Runners. It gets into the science. I know it's got, full Krebs cycle as part of the diagrams, but it also has this page. I'll show you a close-up of it. The differences in energy sources, energy contribution by different events. And now, Co was a 800-meter, 1,500-meter runner, but this has a marathon chapter as well. So it covers 100 meters up to the marathon, and we see the anaerobic versus aerobic components of performance in determining that. And, we get to 800 meters, and you're looking at about a 40-60 split, right? 40% anaerobic contribution, 60% aerobic. That's some people would say it's 50-50. You gotta have the speed of a sprinter, but then you have to have the endurance of at least a miler, or maybe even a 5K runner, be better, to run a really good half mile or 800 meters. But there's a very significant anaerobic contribution. That means you're spiking the lactic acid, really high lactate levels in that. And, there's an element of raw speed, but not just raw speed in terms of pure sprint speed, like what you could run for 100 meters, but what you could actually grind through when your blood gets really acidic and you've got to really throw down those high lactate levels. And it's an anaerobic energy contribution. Now, for distance running, we don't have to worry about that as much because it quickly drops off. By 5K, you're looking at about a 90% aerobic, 10% anaerobic contribution, and the anaerobic contribution usually in the 5K happens in the last kilometer or the last 800 meters when people are really starting to throw down and kick, because you've been at VO2 max for 12 minutes, and then you're just, really, it depends what time you're running for 5K, but that's just an example. And then at 10K, you're looking at 95% aerobic. By the time you get up to a marathon, you're looking at 98, 99% aerobic energy contribution. You don't have to worry about your lactate levels because that's not the limiting factor, right? And so if you're training for a half marathon or a marathon or an ultra marathon or basically any event that's going to take you over 60 minutes, you're not so worried about being able to buffer high amounts of lactic acid that much. You're more worried about things like glycogen depletion and dehydration and sheer muscle fatigue from a lot of pounding, right? Those are the limiting factors in the long event. So it pays to have a really strong aerobic system. And how do you get a strong aerobic system? Well, you run higher mileage, higher volume, and a lot of it, the vast majority of it, is going to be at aerobic, easy conversational pace. Now, part of that's so you don't get hurt, right? A lot of structural fatigue, a lot of impact force with running fast. It's an injury risk when you're trying to run higher mileage. But the heart and lungs, they could only develop so fast, they can only work so hard. You're getting all these great adaptations of blood flow and the size of the mitochondria and your ability to utilize fat as a fuel, burning fat, right? Fat burning zone. So if you're keeping your heart rate lower, under 75%, for a lot of these base miles, you're building up that aerobic system. That's going to make you super strong. It's going to make you super strong, capillary bed density, things like that. And it's going to give you a lot of strength, skeletal muscular strength, because you're running higher mileage, spending more time on your feet, fat burning better. You're getting all these aerobic benefits. The icing on the cake, so to speak, the top of this pyramid, that's extra 20%, of speed work is what really gives you that extra boost and gives you a lot of gains as well. But if you don't have that aerobic base first, it's going to be hard to maintain peak fitness. Now, the idea of doing HIIT training, high intensity interval training, you get a lot of bang for your buck really quickly. No, not gonna lie. You start doing kilometer repeats on the track, you're doing intervals here and there, you're doing hill sprints, you're running fast every day, tempo run every day, right? You're gonna get in shape really fast. The problem with that is, besides the injury risk, is that usually that caves in. After several weeks, maybe a month or two, you're running really well, then you either get sick or injured, or your fitness just starts cratering off. I experienced this in high school a lot. I ran my 3K PR in the winter. We didn't even have an indoor track season. I was so amped up. I raced indoor track once, ran my 3K PR, never beat it in outdoor season in the spring. Same thing happened in college a couple of times. I'd run my first 10K of the season, 5K of the season, boom, PR. After that, you get to the championships and fitness has already gone off the hill. Part of that's because we did high intensity indoor track racing in the winter, and then we were trying to carry that all through the spring. By the time you get to May, it didn't work out very well. But you see the same thing in ultra trail running, right? You can't just be at top peak fitness for more than a couple months, 3-4 months, or something's gonna fail usually, and until you reestablish aerobic base. And so that's the whole idea with 80-20 training, is that you're not running more than 20% of your weekly mileage, much more over the threshold. But my whole point on this video, and this is the key takeaway in these last couple minutes here, is that it's going to vary depending on the week and at what stage you are in your training, how soon your race is, and what type of race you are doing. So the shorter events, yeah, you're going to need some more high intensity speed training for the 1500 or the mile or the 5K or 10K even than you would if you were just training for the marathon or an ultra marathon, where it's like, boom, long run every day. I don't do a long run every day, but you kind of get the idea. You get in ultras and you're like, oh, I just got to spend time on my feet. I got to build this huge aerobic base. Do I really even need that much speed work? Well, I'm going to say it's a balance. It's a balance, and it varies by the week. And if you look at my training, we'll do an example of training here. Pull up the Strava screen. Last summer I was training for Sierras and All mountain race. This is 3 weeks before Sierras and All. This is 5 weeks before the Pikes Peak Marathon. Some of my better races last year, getting second place to Kilian Jornet at Pikes Peak and running 3:38 there. So it's 5 weeks before that. I only ran 79 miles that week. I'll put that in kilometers there. But I did over 20,000 feet of vert. Put that in meters there. It was a 14-hour training week, 14 hours and 22 minutes on training. And if you see the workout breakdown, and this is the tricky thing, breaking down the workouts, Monday I did this long run. It's called the Skyline. It basically links up all the local peaks in Boulder. It's pretty gnarly. I was running it steady, but there were some uphill pushes where my heart rate spiked. And so I'm going to say that's about 10 miles worth of quality. The run was, 18 miles, 4 hours, 3.5 hours. I'm going to say, 10 miles in there, 2 hours in there was a little over the aerobic threshold. I was pushing a bit. So that's 10 miles of quality. Next high intensity workout that week was on Thursday. I did 2 times 20 minutes, 2 times 20 minute surges. I was practicing the transition of going up a steep hill and then running steady on the flat. More like lactate threshold training, definitely getting some heart rate spikes over the threshold. So we're gonna say that's 40 minutes of quality, or about 5 miles. It's probably a little less than 5 miles, but if it was flat, it would have been a much bigger distance, again with the mountain training. And then final quality workout of the week, and I usually don't even do 3 quality workouts each week, even though I'm running 10 to 12 times each week. They're mostly easy miles. Is on Sunday. I did 8 times 800 meters, but I did it on a treadmill at 20% grade, 15% grade. It was really spiking the heart rate hard. It was almost approaching, VO2 max critical velocity, things like that. It was a demanding session. It's a tough session. I'll actually link to that video at the end of this video. You can check it out, as well as in the description below. Sandy helped film it at the gym. This was last summer. 25 minutes, we'll say, of quality, or 4 miles about. So if we do it by miles, that's 19 miles of quality for the week on a 79.7 mile week. That's 23.8%. 23.8% of quality miles in that week. So it was a little over 20%, right? The rest were all easy. And some were high altitude mountain runs as well, but they were lower heart rate values. If we did it by time, on the metric, it was 185 minutes of quality over 862 minutes of total training time for the week. And that's 21.4%. So that's kind of the difference there is if you do it by time or miles, you know, it varies a little bit. They're both a little over 20%. That's probably one of my hardest training weeks of the whole year, right? 20,000 feet of vert on a pretty lower mileage week. It's a pretty high percentage of quality work. Now, earlier on in the season, I was recovering from Comrades Mont Blanc Marathon and those disasters, and I was just running easy because I was trying to get my feet back under me. I was just running 100% easy. Whereas this week, I'm over 20% quality. Now, you may have a mix where you're at 10% quality or 15%. Maybe sometimes you hit 25%. But generally, we don't want to be doing 40% or 50% of high quality running as a weekly total, because then you're probably either running really low mileage or you're risking injury or overtraining or burnout, so to speak. A lot of burnout I think is mental, but you could literally kind of destroy your fitness. It just kind of erodes under you if you don't have that aerobic base and you're just blasting intervals all the time, right? You get in shape really fast, but your fitness is going to crater. You're just not going to be consistent. And so that's the whole idea with 80-20 training, is that you're really limiting how much quality you do, especially if you focus on longer distance events, half marathon, marathon, ultra marathon. It really doesn't take that much fine tuning and speed work to get in, to get up to peak fitness if you have a large aerobic base of high mileage running, and you still need the element of a long run. Most of your miles that are quality are probably going to actually be either long tempo run efforts, like 20-minute tempo, 2 times 20 minutes, 8 times 5-minute hill repeats, or even throwing down at the end of a long run, second half of a long run, you're throwing down for 10 miles or 16K. That would be a good way to get in a lot of volume at 80-85% of your maximum heart rate. Whereas the real icing on the top, you've got hill sprints and speed, pure VO2 max, maybe then you're over 90-95% of max heart rate, or at least you're spinning the legs faster than 5K intensity or 5K race pace. So it varies depending on the week. You don't have to average exactly 80-20 on most weeks. You probably shouldn't, is what I'm saying. And that's the whole takeaway of this video, is that I don't like these rules because I like to bend these rules a bit, but in principle it's a fairly good concept to realize. It's a safe thing where it says, okay, you're a distance runner, you don't need to make half of your training high intensity sprints and high intensity intervals. You get in shape really well, it's good to have that mix. You need that mix. You don't want to be all slow running 100% of the time, but for most people, building your mileage base up to consistent levels and staying healthy, not getting injured, is going to be the thing that brings you the biggest gains. The quality work, the speed work is really just the icing on top. And Arthur Lydiard said this back in the 1960s, right? It's not a new concept. It's based on physiology and science, but there's also a certain art to it of field-based training as well. And if you go by time, other metrics like how much climbing you do in a week, and the elements of how you sprinkle in those quality workouts is the real key ingredients to the puzzle. But this is a long training talk. I'm going to end there. Thanks so much for all your support on here. Thanks to Patreon supporters for really making this possible. Again, check out, subscribe on here for more of these types of videos. Check out a playlist or that video of that treadmill workout I did last summer. I'll link to it there. As well as check out our website. We sell training plans, Coach Andy and I, on sagerunning.com, any surface, any distance. Really appreciate your support. Hope you're staying healthy. Stay tuned for more.